Good morning. Welcome to the morning market briefing. Today is Monday, the 4th day of May. And you may be thinking to yourself, well, you didn't do the thing. And to you, I say, I will never kowtow to a Disney adult Star Wars fan base. And today's not even on this day. And I wanted to start off by just saying, if you're wondering why we have such a problem with incel culture in this country, and maybe that we've fallen apart over the last 30, 40 years and everything feels sad, it's because I would argue one of our most famous movies is about a dorky kid who teams up with a homeless guy to fight his dad so he can kiss his sister. And that's just, I think that's what we have as a problem as a culture. And ultimately it culminates with him committing a terrorist attack at his dad's office, which, if you wonder why Gen Z has turned out so soft, I think that might be part of the problem. Attacking rather than being productive, turning all of your energy towards hating your dad is probably not good for culture. So I think you should reflect today on what the meaning of Star Wars is and whether or not it really is aligned with your personal values. I certainly have done so, and also, man, it's a Disney thing, and we know how I feel about Disney. So that's how I want to start the podcast. There's no one here to stop me. Andrew is in Mexico. Ben is somewhere in Europe, and I think TK is actually back in Minnesota. So everybody just in the finest places in the world right now, and somebody's got to do work, and it's going to be me and Hixie, obviously, old reliable as we call him. So let's get into the news. Over the weekend, we continued to see news come out of Iran. There was a report that potentially there were some bulk shippers that were attacked. That came through, I guess, a UK Navy report. The U.S. has since denied it. But in the last few hours, we've gotten a new program that's been launched, which is called Project Freedom. So Trump is essentially trying to, another way to navigate the quagmire that is the Strait of Hormuz. So Project Freedom is basically the U.S.'s idea to start guiding commercial ships out of the Strait of Hormuz that have been trapped there, primarily commercial ships only that have been trapped during the ongoing conflict. And they're going to do it by what they're calling a, quote, coordination cell, which involves countries, insurance companies, shipping organizations, but not U.S. Navy warships, to come together to locate mines and share information with the ships in real time to essentially chart navigable routes through the strait so we can start getting some stuff moved through. So, I mean, I guess it ultimately depends whether or not there are actual ships out there that are attacking. We obviously aren't getting great reports there. There's these ideas that they have, like, I think they're calling them mosquito fleets, which is basically a bunch of speedboats with Iranian, I guess, IRGC people on there, and they're zipping out to attack ships as they cross the Strait of Hormuz. I don't know that that's true. I don't know that it's not true. But the main takeaway here is that Trump said that interference will, quote, unfortunately have to be dealt with forcefully. So we'll see how that develops. I think it continues to be sort of a major question mark. Oil is at $112. That's on Brent. So it's down a little bit from where it was to end the week last week, but still relatively elevated. I don't know that anything meaningful comes out of that this week, but that continues to be the news. It was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, so that's my job to report it. So we'll see how that ongoing conflict goes. The big news that we didn't talk about on Friday because it came out after the call is that we got the ISM manufacturing report, which came in at a 52.7, which was slightly lower than the expectation of 53.2. But I think the expectations were probably a little high. That would have been just an unbelievable print. So that would be the fourth straight month that we are in expansion territory in manufacturing, which of all the data that comes out, no one really seems to be talking about. That's the longest streak since 2022, and it's the highest reading we've had since August of 2022. So suffice it to say that the manufacturing industry is actually showing some growth for the first time in quite some time, and we haven't had sustained growth for a number of years now. And I think that's actually really positive. The employment piece was at a 46.4, so that's actually a contraction territory. and it was one of the weaker prints we've seen. And I think that's really more the no hire, no fire. I think that given the uncertainty around tariffs, are they affecting anyone? Are they actually going to have to be paid? Are they going to be paid back? Are people going to get money? I think that's actually causing quite a bit of confusion in the manufacturing space, and I think that the net result of that is probably that employment is relatively weak. Prices paid and new orders were exceptionally strong. 13 out of 18 industries showed expansion. So, I mean, there's a lot of positives to be taken, especially considered that these numbers were high, the highest they've been in years, and you have all of that variability on top. The panelist surveys were a little mixed. A lot of people were citing the same problems: inflation, employment, what's going to happen. You know, the war in Iran is causing problems in terms of maybe some supply chain issues or worry about it, energy costs. But all that being said, an incredibly strong print, and we will get services, I believe, on Wednesday. So it's possible that we could have a double beat there, having growth both in manufacturing and in services. And the underlying economy continues to be strong. In fact, I saw some reports that we've seen the lowest levels of the trading markets, Kalshi and Polymarket, saying the likelihood of a recession is at the lowest point it's been all year. At one point it was over 50%. Now it's closer to 20, which I think is very indicative of there are people who are seeing this. I mean, I think if you walked out and asked the average person, people would say things are bad, the war in Iran, yada, yada, yada. But in reality, we're seeing a lot of strength. We've seen earnings be very good for a number of companies. We've seen some obviously miss the mark, but we're in a good spot. Now, of course, flipping the other hand, we did have a major bankruptcy over the weekend. And anyone who's listened to this call for a long time knows that something my dad used to say, he was an airline pilot for Delta, was that there are two kinds of airlines: those that have gone bankrupt and those that will. And so Spirit Airlines basically sent out a press release at 3 a.m. on Saturday morning saying that they were canceling all flights effectively and they were going to begin an orderly wind down. There was some talk last week that Trump was going to try and step in and offer a bailout. There's $500 billion as a number being floated out there, but it seems that ultimately failed. And the irony here is that this was a big feather in the cap for the Biden administration. Elizabeth Warren and Pete Buttigieg especially really rallied against Spirit merging with JetBlue, the idea being that they were going to form a monopoly. This was going to be a horrible blight on the American consumer, and that, the prices of airline flights were going to just spiral out of control, and they would be effectively a monopoly. Now, I think we all know that both Spirit and JetBlue were not exactly big companies. In fact, they both were pretty small, and even if they merged together, wouldn't be anywhere near the size of a Delta or United or any of the big dogs. They'd probably still be smaller than Southwest. And so the idea that the reason that they should merge was bad for the consumer turned out to be, pretty alarmist and incorrect. And I would argue that what's more important than a couple bucks on what is the cheapest airline, basically, if you're paying $50 and it goes to $55, but the company still exists, there are 17,000 people who lost their job over the weekend because they weren't able to effectively merge with another company and continue operations and look for synergies and try and pay down some of this debt. So this is the first major airline, one that people are really aware of, to shut down really since 9/11. So Midway Airlines was based out of Chicago, and it was roughly the same size, and they, basically 9/11 hit and they ceased operations. We've had other airlines fail, but they weren't nearly as big. They're mostly regional, things like Aloha Air. But this is the problem with the industry at large, is that, there are a lot of variables like supply and demand of seats. There are a lot of variables like the cost of jet fuel, which obviously is elevated to this moment. And it's just one of those things where there's just perfect competition. If you read the book 0 to 1 by Peter Thiel, he talks about how X.com and PayPal effectively were running each other into the ground because they had virtually the exact same product and they were competing on price, and they were both actively going bankrupt. And so they decided to merge. And then there was one company that did that, and they were competing on price, and they were able to get those off the ground. And the net economic result of that has been unbelievable. I mean, particularly when SpaceX goes public at the end of June, in theory, that will be just one more feather in the cap for what they call the PayPal mafia. But think Yelp, YouTube, eBay, bought PayPal. I mean, there's been a zillion companies that have come out of that. I mean, Palantir is Peter Thiel's new thing. That's another massive company. There's just been unbelievable wealth created by the idea that two companies that were failing were able to come to an agreement to merge and then create a profitable business that ultimately set off some of the most unbelievable economic booms of the last 20 years. I mean, Tesla, I didn't even mention Tesla. I mean, those are huge companies, trillions and trillions of dollars of economic value, and hundreds of thousands of jobs have all come from that. And you could argue that there was never a monopoly in play. These are two, obviously garbage airlines, and we could have come away with this with some positives, but unfortunately, the big giant poisonous slug that is government jumped on top of it and said that the evil robber barons of Spirit Airlines are trying to steal your money. And I don't think anyone's ever flown Spirit thought these people have lots of money based on the quality of their airline. So sad day, but not unexpected. I wouldn't be surprised if we sat here another 5 years from now and we had another airline go bust, because it's just it's a bad business. I don't know how to fix it, but there's certainly a possibility that somebody out there will eventually figure it out. Other news, speaking of garbage companies, GameStop is now looking to basically buy eBay, which former owner of PayPal. And the irony there is when they spun out PayPal, eBay really hasn't done much since then. That was their crown jewel. And for years and years, when you go back to like 2011, 2012, the war cry of investors who were invested in eBay was, you got to spin out PayPal because it's going to be the more valuable product. And for a long time it was. PayPal has not performed well over the last 2 or 3 years. But for a long time, that was just an unbelievable company, and it was at one point a wholly owned subsidiary of eBay. But now GameStop, which is probably the meme stock of the century, which is basically a story of they were a company that were failing. Nobody really plays, brick and mortar video games. Think the actual discs and the cartridges. Everybody just downloads whatever to their computer or their PlayStation to play it now. And that was a business line that eventually died. But, a bunch of dorks rallied together on Reddit and they saved the company. There are a million different new stock issues. They paid off a lot of their debt, and they pivoted hard at, I would argue, a good time into collectibles, trading cards. And so GameStop sort of changed their whole move from, your cartridges and your CDs and that kind of thing into a lot of those like Funko dolls and Pokemon cards, and I believe they now sell baseball cards and things like that as well. And so they think that there are synergies that can be had from doing essentially a takeover of a smaller entity, of a bigger entity, of eBay, and then they can streamline a lot of their operations and potentially put themselves in a new, better position. So it would be a cash and stock deal at a 20% premium to Friday's close. Notably, GameStop is only up about 10%, which kind of indicates that the market at large doesn't know that this is actually going to go through. I mean, if it seemed really likely, we'd probably be up 19.5%, and people would be trying to play that little 0.5% arbitrage as they waited for the deal to close. But we're still really far off of that. So depending on how you feel about this, there could be an easy 10% upside to be made if you bought eBay stock here in hopes that they're going to be bought out. But GameStop is a $12 billion company. eBay is $46 billion. So this is pretty unusual, but they have announced that they have at least a letter of intent, but not an actual signed deal with TD Bank to provide $20 billion in debt financing. And that the idea is that they could take out this debt. They could save $2 billion a year by merging the businesses, and they could pay that debt off pretty quickly. And then you have one bigger, badder industry that really leans into the collectibles, and that Ryan Cohen, the CEO of GameStop, thinks he could maybe do a better job of running a $56 billion company in total than the $12 billion company he's running right now. And I don't know that that's not true, given that the pivot has been so successful for GameStop, and they're not really, the dying company that they once were. But I mean, this is a massive and ambitious idea, I think. So we'll see what comes of it. But I think it's an interesting story, and we'll definitely keep an eye on it. This is a GameStop market story that I'm actually interested in. But we'll keep an eye on it for everybody and give updates as we go along. The next big Wall Street Journal article, again, wouldn't be the morning market briefing if we weren't talking AI, but Anthropic, who continues to absolutely dunk on ChatGPT, has announced that they're nearing a $300 million joint venture with Wall Street, specifically with Goldman Sachs, Blackstone, and a San Francisco private equity firm called Hellman and Friedman, which I believe they own, are mostly the owners of things like Simply Safe, which is, the podcast-driven security company. I'm sure everybody who's ever listened to a podcast has heard an ad for them. I had them for a while. We've since switched, but they're a private equity firm that deals in a lot of kind of niche spaces. But they're all coming together with Goldman Sachs leading the charge, doing about half the $300 million investment. And the idea is they're going to create an internal consulting arm inside of Anthropic that would basically be at the direction of these private equity companies to go into the companies that they purchase and teach them how to deploy AI into their businesses. So in theory, Goldman Sachs buys some startup firm. They've got a great idea. They then tap this new Anthropic Goldman Sachs joint venture to come in and say, hey, we can streamline your business by doing X, Y, and Z. We're going to deploy AI into these verticals. And then Goldman Sachs gets an unbelievable return on their investment because they grow the value of that firm very quickly as a result of the AI being implemented within that system. And so we'll see how it goes. I mean, they're saying it could be announced as early as this morning, and that the players involved are really excited about it, but it's not a done deal. But it's just another example of Anthropic seemingly gaining market share very quickly against ChatGPT and OpenAI. So the landscape continues to shift very quickly, especially as both of those companies are looking to IPO later this year. And I mean, I just worry that OpenAI is going to suffer from the first movers problem, which is they're going to be the first one to create an MP3 player, but there's going to be somebody who comes out there and creates the iPod of AI, and that they're essentially going to be relegated to the scrap heap of history. And a lot of people are going to try and get in on that IPO, at $800 billion or close to $1 trillion, and they may end up losing. I mean, think there was a company that was really hot. I want to say it was 2010, maybe 2011, called Flip Camera. And their whole thing was that it was a small modular handheld camera that you could take video with, and you could quickly edit and put those on YouTube. And they essentially got market corrected immediately by the iPhone. And I can't remember who bought Flip, but I want to say it was either Google or Microsoft. One of the big companies bought Flip cameras, and it was just a massive write-off for them because it just got market corrected immediately. And I think that that's a possibility. I mean, I think Fitbit was the first mover in watches, and now Apple and Garmin dominate that space. And Fitbit did IPO, and the stock languished, and then they were purchased by Google. Or, there's a million examples of this, but I think that could be a potentiality here for OpenAI and ChatGPT. So we'll keep an eye on it as that develops. A lot of earnings continue to roll in this week. Disney, which we talked about, is Wednesday. I think Gilead Pharmaceutical is Friday. We've got the ISM services on Wednesday. Just a lot of market news. You'll be subject to just the Tomcat podcast again tomorrow, and I think TK is back Wednesday, and then the full crew. Well, I guess Andrew will be back Thursday, Friday, and then we'll get Ben back next Monday. So continue to stay tuned. If you have any questions, concerns, please email me if you have something you want me to talk about, because I've got to prep all the notes for these podcasts for this week. So if you can create some content for me to talk about, I wouldn't hate it. And if it touches on something you want to hear about, even better. But continue to tell a friend, share, subscribe to the YouTube, leave us a comment on Spotify or iTunes, and we will see you guys tomorrow.